Good morning, Sean here from Mountains Garage. It's early morning, it's about 5 o'clock in the morning. I came out and opened up the doors in the shop. Try to get some cool air in here. Yesterday afternoon to repair my paint debacle, I had to run the parts washer, which is a couple hundred degrees, and it kind of heats the shop up. Not bad in the wintertime. And the other day I actually put it on wheels, and I can wheel it outside, but the problem with my shop, it stays nice and cool inside. If you wait till midday when it's 90 and humid out and open all the doors, everything in here is going to frost over with sweat and rust, like my lathe and the mill engines I got sitting around. So you got to plan accordingly. If this was a high rate shop, I guess the doors would be open all day long, but it's just me, and I'll work around it because I hate rust. So I did fix my paint debacle, and I was not brave enough to use the other can. I tested a piece after thinking on it for a few minutes. Then I don't want to do this again because it sucked. I had to scrape, take it outside and pressure wash in the hot sun, and then run the pressure washer, the parts washer, and then paint it again. So I went with olive drab green, my favorite color. So today, I guess we're going to call this assembly. We got to talk about a few things. I'm going to show you the trans brake kit, talk about that for a minute, and talk about transmission rebuild kits in general. So let's get at it. So just to get you up to speed, if you haven't watched the other videos, I cut the case off. I run just eyeball right down the flat surface there, cut her off both sides. Nothing to it. The vent. I put a picture at the end of yesterday's video showing that my tool kind of holds that on an angle. It does two things. It lets you tighten that up without hitting the case or messing around making a special wrench. But more importantly, on the inside, it teardrops that hole. If I had gone straight in, it gets way too close to that. And when you put the gasket on, now my hole lines up. If I'd gone straight in, I'd run into the side of the gasket. So I discovered this by accident because I was having trouble trying to drill it straight. It just works out better. And this hose, I was just trying it on for size, but I'm going to make a catch can that bolts on down here on those two front pan bolts. I installed my linkage seal, the shift shaft, the rooster, the rod, and of course the nail. The nail you can't get out with the pump in there unless you bend the nail. Lots of people talk about, oh, you got to bend it over so this doesn't fall out when you're washing it. Well, you should be changing the seal, and this shouldn't be in there when you're washing it. So you should never have to bend the nail unless you have to service it in the car. It's just a nail. It's not a big deal. I don't put the guide in for park yet because I don't want the parking pole interfering in my installation of the lower unit. But as soon as I get the lower unit in, and the snap ring in, and the center support bolt in, you go ahead and put the spring on that and the guide plate, because if you drop the spring down inside the case, ask me how I know you got to take it apart to get it back out. So, that's the order that's going to happen. On the passenger side, I went ahead and installed my -6 AN fittings. These are straight thread. They have a washer underneath. They should thread all the way in by hand, and then you just tighten them up. Don't go crazy, you'll break the case. There's a few transmissions out there, Turbo 400s, that do have pipe thread. We already talked about that, but these are straight thread for the cool lines. I went ahead and painted up and installed the governor cover backwards because this is full manual. We don't need a governor. And it just tells anybody looking at it there's nothing in there. And it has a manual valve body. So if you're buying a transmission and that's upside down, you got a manual valve body. The rear case bushing, like we talked about, we're going to drive it in inside the case just enough to give the bearing a little bit of a register. Not even a 16th probably, just enough you can catch it with your fingernail. I like to put the notches right back where they were. The bushing's identical. You can buy a really nice aftermarket bushing. It's got a shoulder on it up here. It's a little bit extended length for the same reason. And you just drive it in flush. It's worth buying. I don't have one. I've actually never used one, but I'd like to, and I'm going to put it on my want list. A little bit of cylindrical part bonding agent or retaining compound around the outside of that will also help keep from walking around. This next part's a little tricky to talk about, but my goal, I'm going to be less than 1,000 horsepower, and that's why I chose the modifications I'm doing. There's a lot more things you can do. I mean, you can spend $10,000, $12,000 on a Turbo 400, but it didn't start its life and spent the first 30 to 50 years, you know, in a one-ton dually or something like that. It does share a lot of the same parts. Me, I've got, you know, and what we're learning to do is to take an old core and make something raceable out of it. So while they share the same name, they don't really do the same thing. This won't take 5,000 horsepower, but it'll take, you know, probably 1,500 or less all day long. I'm not going to put shafts in this, so you got to make that choice yourself, or break stuff and learn as you go. Never really broken a lot of stuff, so I'm not. We just assembled the lower unit yesterday. You can make that full roller, and let's talk about why I even want to put a roller bearing on the output shaft, which is the only mod I'm really doing. So I was kind of using some slang there, but when I say I'm not putting shafts in it, I'm not putting 300M input shaft, intermediate shaft. There's 3 shafts you can change in a 400. Not changing those. I built transmissions with them. They're expensive. If you're into that, you might as well buy aluminum drums. All great modifications, all expensive. We're just going to put a roller thrust on the output because we're going to turn the pump up, and that creates more lube pressure and converter charge pressure, and I'm going to show you when we build the pump. Sorry I got to get all theory on you here, but there's books written about Turbo 400 modifications, and I didn't write them, but I'm interpreting. So you got lube pressure, you got converter charge pressure. The converter charge pressure actually pushes on like the thrust bearing of the engine, so we're going to mitigate that some. But it also pushes right back down the input shaft, down through all the shafts, and eventually there's that 3-tanged washer and thrust bushing on the back. And they claim, I don't know how they determine this, but there's upwards of 200 pounds of thrust being shoved back on the back of the case. So that's why we're going to put a roller bearing there. We want a little more clearance. I'm going to tighten the clearance up in the back. Stock with the thrust washer was, I believe it's 7 to 19 thousandths rear end play, which you just check the back of the shaft with a dial indicator. No big deal. I'm going to tighten that up because it's a roller bearing. You got to allow for thermal expansion. But if I get anything less than 10, I'll probably be happy. Probably around 5. I measured my original stack. This is identical, and that's I'm going to add 10 and see if that tightens it up. And I got another 15. That's all the kit comes with, the three shims. But I have all kinds of differential shims, so it's not a problem. I like to put my shim up on the back of the output shaft. Again, there's no guys. None of this stuff comes in instructions. I've just learned by doing. I don't trust the shim down inside the case. With the only really holding it is the bushing sticking out. I don't have enough room for that, so I put the shim up on the output shaft. This, if you didn't know which way it went in, it goes black side down against the case. If you just put it in there and spin it, it instantly feels better black side down. It feels wrong the other way. Zooming in on the case, you can see that 3-tang washer. It started to wear a little groove in there. Eventually it wears enough so it either breaks the lug or wears itself out and starts spinning around. So another good reason for the thrust bearing. It's really inexpensive. I bought mine on eBay. I don't remember the price, but I'm sure it was inexpensive. And install it. I was motivated to shoot this video assembling this transmission because I already had my Turbo 400 junk dragged out and spread out from doing a stock rebuild last weekend. Beware of the wording when you buy seal kits and rebuild kits. This is a seal and gasket set. that's a gasket set. You don't get any seals. Same goes with the kits. You know, the cheap one they advertise for $80 will have clutches but no steels. It won't have bushings, bands, filter, modulator, everything you're going to need. I still buy a kit every now and then. I also buy a lot of seals in bulk. Just collected a lot of stuff, but if I have to just pull the pump out for some reason, I don't want to break into a $40 gasket set or seal kit when I can just buy a couple seals and accomplish the same thing. Clutches, I invested a lot of money. These are all Turbo 400. Those are intermediate. These are forward and direct. I got different size steels so I can set my stack height, at least have some choices. The kit you buy should have 2 different thickness steels. So a lot of times I, will interchange them between the forward and direct to get the height I need. Intermediate, a stock Turbo 400 has 3 clutches. Sometimes a wave plate, so you can take up some space there, but you're gonna be looking to take up some space. So same thing, you can get different thicknesses. Alto, the brand, sells a nice power pack that actually fits 4 clutches in a Turbo 400 intermediate, which is they're super thin. I think they're 4L80. They ride on the direct drum. A 4L80 drum will fit in a Turbo 400, and actually with an intermediate clutches ride is a little bit thicker to take all 4. Thicker ones, it gets pretty sticky. I'm getting ahead of myself, but my point being, your kit you buy may or may not have everything you need. You may find yourself hunting for a way to take up some space in the stack height of your clutches. Finally, the valve body itself. It's a nice billet aluminum. It's sold by several companies, Jags. This is the Transmission Specialties. They all come with the same instruction sheet, which is my first clue, is they're all the same. Somebody's making them for these people. I don't really care about that. What I do care about is it's a decent piece. It seems to work really nice. Internal solenoid. On an external solenoid, your solenoid would go through the modulator hole in the side of the case. In this case, we're going to plug it. It does not come with the O-ring. Whatever. And now the 12 volts for the solenoid is now coming through what used to be the electric kickdown. They do give you an O-ring for that. They give you the hardware to bolt the valve body down. The instructions mention nothing about the pressure regulator spring, but I just go ahead and install that. They do mention these are return springs for the direct clutch. That's a brand new manual valve. And the solenoid itself with the valve. Bolts on top of the valve body. It's really simple. One of these I bought, they had this bolted on backwards so the wires would not reach that. Had to turn it around. A couple little nuts. They do mention leaving the second seal out of the direct drum. They do not mention leaving the second seal off the center support, but I did call Transmission Specialties and they said, oh yeah, do that too. So I've done a couple of them. They work good, and that's why I bought another. Back over at the transmission, I lubed the rear case bushing. I stuck the bearing down with some green assembly goo as well. I went ahead and put the rear band in case I get my end play correct. I won't have to take it back out. It's optional whether you choose to trial fit it without it or not. And I put my threading ring in that my center support sits on. And lastly, I glued the 2 shims I'm going to try first on the back of the output shaft. I got my handle on it, and now I'm going to lower it in place. I mentioned it quickly at the end of yesterday's video, but that mark I put with a Sharpie is where my center support bolt is. So when I lower that down, I can line the lugs up. The bevel snap ring, so the threading ring went in underneath the center support. Above it is the big bevel snap ring, and the book tells you to put the opening of the snap ring in that big void. To me it seems stronger if I just use that void over there. And that way there's no flex in that part of the ring. I mean, there's no problem with center supports popping out. It's bolted in. But, I tend to overthink things. So that's where I put the gap on that one. The threading ring, I did put it in the opening because it seems like having the threading ring all the way around for the center support to sit on uninterrupted seems like a good idea. Then I put the bolt in. I'm going to flip this down. And the bolt went right in by hand, and so did the snap ring for the center support. And I wish you could feel how nice that spins. I didn't set up the dial indicator because I can go right through that hole right there. With a feeler gauge, I don't know if you can see it without the light. I have a light right here. I can get right down, well, you have to take my word for it, I guess, but right there, I'm looking at the bearing. I can slip a feeler gauge in there. I got about 4 thousandths. It's a tight 4. I think it'll be okay because 7 to 19 was the stock with the thrust washer, and I wanted it tighter. My only other option is a 15,000 shim, which is bigger, so that's not going to work anyway. So then, as I said, I went ahead and put the spring on the parking pawl and put the guide in. That only fits one way, and now it works nice. Let me make it actually lock in. Works good. Next is the intermediate clutches. So I can bolt the case saver down through this hole for the band apply above the 2-3 accumulator on a stock one. So I got a bolt going through there and a bolt through the side of the case. But first we need to put in intermediate clutches. Intermediate clutch. I have a selection of pressure plates, backing plates, whatever you want to call them. Let's talk about snap rings for a minute. Those are the stock ones. Pretty thin, flimsy. These are the heavy-duty replacements. Really all you need, especially with the case saver we're going to put in. I also got this way overkill spiral lock. And why not? I'm going to use this and the case saver. I had some 80 thousandths Ray Bestis waffle. And that with a thin pressure plate I had. And a combination of steels, which is all I had. I wish I had one more thin steel, but I got some clearance that I'm happy with. Happier if I had a little more. But it'll wear in, I guess. So I'm going to go ahead and put some oil on those and put them in for good. With 4 clutches on the intermediate. Alright, this is the giant spiral lock. Installed in the case. It actually goes in easier than the big fat snap ring that I usually use. So I like that. I'll be using these in the future. And I also like the case saver. It seems really rugged, easy to put in. I put a little drop of Loctite on the nut because I can't help myself. It has serrations, but that's okay. And same with the bolt, one little drop of Loctite. Now on a Turbo 400, once you've got the center support bolt in and tight, you can go ahead and do the valve body. And in this case I'm going to because it's laid all over the bench and I want my bench back. And then I will return to do the video on the direct drum, forward drum, and pump. And that'll pretty much finish it off. So, I'm going to go ahead and make potato salad, have lunch, post this video, and start working on the next one. Like and subscribe. Thanks again.